Hi, welcome back to this free-for-all Friday edition of Focal Point, AFR Talk, 888-589-8840, the number to call, 888-589-8840. And again, I have just read you Russell Moore's words. He speaks for the Southern Baptist Convention. I want to ask you what you think about these words of Russell Moore. Missing from Moore's answer was a firm requirement that a presidential candidate be a vocal opponent of gay marriage. Are you satisfied with that? Are you satisfied with an evangelical leader who's saying, I will be happy with a presidential candidate who does not support vocally, visibly, publicly natural marriage? Are you okay with that? Who won't fight for that? Are you all right? Do you believe that the war over marriage, that it's lost? There's no point in fighting it. We've just got to surrender. We just got to roll up the carpet. We got to hide in our little hidey holes and hope that they'll leave us some table scraps of religious liberty. What do you think? 888-589-8840 is the number. Now, you're aware that the president met with the Pope yesterday, and it turns out that there is a significant difference in the recollection of the president about what they talked about and the recollection of the Pope. Now, I want to play a couple of sound bites, first of all. Then I'm going to get into the differences in the way this interview is being rehearsed by President Obama and then by the Vatican. Here is clip number one, because one of the things that both of them acknowledged they talk about was religious liberty. Now, I want you to listen very carefully to what President Obama says when he talks about religious liberty and how narrow his understanding of religious liberty is. Let's listen.
In your meeting with His Holiness Pope Francis, did he register any objections with you about the contraception coverage mandate in the Affordable Care Act or your efforts to advance the rights of gays and lesbians in the United States?
He actually did not touch in detail on the Affordable Care Act. In my meeting with the Secretary of State, Cardinal Pentolin, we discussed briefly the issue of making sure that that conscience and religious freedom was observed in the context of applying the law. And I explained to him that most religious organizations are entirely exempt. Religiously affiliated hospitals or universities or NGOs simply have to attest that they have a religious objection, in which case they are not required to provide contraception, although the employees of theirs who choose are able to obtain it through the insurance company.
So notice that his understanding of religious liberty is limited to religious organizations. You have to be affiliated with a religious organization to get any kind of a waiver, any kind of exemption. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we talked about this before, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it. But the point is that the Constitution nowhere, anywhere guarantees the free exercise of religion to organizations. It guarantees the free exercise of religion to individuals. Religious liberty is not about religious organizations. It is about religious people. It is about religious individuals. But the president has such a short-sighted understanding. You know, and you look at all of the rights in the Bill of Rights. They're all individual rights. You and I individually have the right to bear arms. You and I individually have the right to freedom of speech. You and I individually have the right to peaceably assemble with other individuals. You and I individually have the right to petition the government for the redress of grievances. And none of those are conditioned upon us belonging to some organization. Now, we can join an organization, and if we do, then all of the individuals in the organization have the right to petition the government for the redress of grievances. So we can go to the government as a group. We can speak to them as an organization if we want, but it's not our organization that has the constitutional right to appeal to the government for the redress of grievances. It is each one of us as an individual who makes up that organization. Now, here is clip number two, and the topic came up about the protection of religious minorities around the world, and the first voice you will hear will be that of President Obama. The second voice that you will hear will be Representative Frank Wolf. So you'll hear Barack Obama telling us what he wants us to hear, what he wants us to think, and then Representative Frank Wolf will bring the reality of what's actually going on. Let's listen.
There was some specific focus on the Middle East, where His Holiness has a deep interest in the Israeli-Palestinian issue, but also what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Lebanon, and the potential persecution of Christians. And I reaffirmed that it is central to U.S. foreign policy that we protect the interests of religious minorities around the world.
We have before us relatively modest legislation that has languished in the Senate for 2 consecutive Congresses now, which would create a special envoy within the U.S. Department of State charged with advocating for vulnerable religious minorities in the Middle East and East Central Asia. How do we explain the utter lack of urgency on the part of our own government to address the epic exodus, that of Christianity, from its very birthplace?
All right, so there's President Obama saying, hey, one of the major concerns we have is religious minorities in the Middle East. I got a huge concern about that. We're all over that. I told the Pope that we're on top of that. Then you have Frank Wolf say, hey, we had legislation to do that, to have a special envoy that would be attached to the State Department, and his job, his responsibility would be to be an advocate for oppressed religious minorities around the world and in the Middle East. And there is a complete, utter absence of any kind of urgency, a total lack of energy on the part and urgency on the part of this government to do anything about it. And we're reading stories every day. I saw another story yesterday about Muslims coming into a Christian village, and they're torching the village, they're burning the village, they're killing Christians. Christians are being forced to flee the country of Syria, literally by the hundreds of thousands now. Maybe 450,000 Christians have had to leave the country of Syria. So with President Obama, again, it just appears to be just words, empty promises with no substance, no meaning. Well, let's go to the phones. Let's go to Skylar in Paducah, Kentucky. Skylar, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you for having me on your program, Mr. Fisher.
Yes, sir.
If you recall, I'm the homeschooler who called in not too long ago just talking about Common Core.
Yeah, great to have you back on.
Well, thank you. Earlier this week, you were talking about the God is Not Dead movie, and I just want to talk a bit about that.
Yes, sir.
Well, on Monday this week, I was in discussion with an atheist, and one of the things we were talking about was the origin of the universe. And a popular theory out right now, as probably most people have heard of, is the Big Bang Theory.
Uh-huh.
In response to that, in short, I said that according to law of conservation of energy, it basically says that no energy can be created or can be destroyed. So therefore, there would be no way for any energy or anything else to be there to cause a boom, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And it's impossible for something to come from nothing. Another theory that he proposed was that the universe was eternal. And if that were true, that would basically mean that there would be no reason for a God. But that's false, because according to the second law of thermodynamics, it states that the universe is running out of usable energy. And the first law says that the energy is running out of is constant. So if the universe were eternal, we would have already run out of all usable energy right now. We obviously haven't. The second law is also known as the law of entropy, which basically says nature with time brings things to disorder. So the question asked there is, who established the original order? And if the universe were eternal, we would have already reached full entropy or disorder by now.
Yeah.
So we went on and talked about other things, and I think Jesus repeatedly just allowed me to talk to that person, giving me the words to say. One of the main reasons for me calling in today is just to encourage people to stand up for their faith and what they believe in. You don't have to be some great or influential person to do it. And tying it into the God is Not Dead movie, the kid who stood up for his faith, he was the only person who did. And, of course, people kind of mocked or poked fun at him, but that didn't stop him for what he did. And something that I like to say is God doesn't always call the equipped. He equips the called.
Good, Skylar. That's a great word. And by the way, how did when you're having this conversation with a friend, you're talking about the first law, of thermodynamics, you're talking about the second law, and how they make the conventional understanding of evolution impossible, scientifically, logically, rationally. How did he respond to that?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because he had basically one of two answers. He either said that he either gave me more theories, but those theories wouldn't work because they all presupposed that something was there for the Big Boom in order for it to work.
Yeah.
Or he just said that he didn't know what the answer was.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Skylar. You know, and I've had people, you know, talking about the Big Bang. Well, you know about the Big Bang. That's where this incredibly dense ball of matter exploded in the universe. Well, where did that incredibly dense ball of matter come from? I mean, that doesn't
I've
answer
that several times too.
Yeah, it doesn't answer a question whatsoever. So, you know, and Richard Dawkins is saying, well, we know how life originated on Earth. It was brought here by aliens from outer space. I mean, he seriously suggested that in the movie Expelled. Aliens brought it on a spaceship. Well, again, that doesn't answer the question. Where did they get it? Where did the life that the aliens brought here, where did that come from?
Exactly.
So they simply have no answers. Well, listen, I appreciate the call, Skylar. Thank you. And thanks for the call. You know, Skylar's 15, and he's running circles around this guy that is an atheist. And again, and I've said this before, it's the left. They want to claim that they're the ones that are all about science. They're pro-science. We're the Neanderthals. We're the anti-science. We're the Hicks. We're the backwoods people that don't know the law of gravity from our left elbow. And the reality is when you start talking science with them, they have no response to that because they're clueless. I mean, these people don't even know what the first law of thermodynamics is. They don't know what the second law of thermodynamics is. They don't know what the fossil record teaches. They don't know the problems and the gaps and the lack of transitional forms in the fossil record. And so when we start talking science to them, they're completely ill-equipped to deal with that. You know, and Skylar made a good point. You know, we don't have to have answers to every question. That's how we learn. In fact, the only way you learn what you need to learn is when you have discussions with people about these important issues and they ask questions you're not sure what the answer to that is. And you realize, whoop, that highlights an area. I need to do some more thinking about that. I need to do some reading about that. I need to do some research about that. If you don't defend your faith, if you don't proclaim your faith, if you don't get into discussions where you are in a position to defend your faith, then you don't realize what you don't know. And that's important for us to learn. So one of the ways is engage. But again, don't feel like you've got to have an answer to every question. You can say, look, I don't know, but let me think about it, study it, read up on it. I'll get back to you. Focal Point AFR Talk, back in 2.